Well, hey folks, it's your old pal King Waspinator. Welcome back to Total Party Skills. Sorry for the ambient construction noises. It's been the first nice, warm, sunny day in a couple weeks, so I guess other people in the neighborhood are taking advantage of it. But I was having a conversation on Twitter with a couple fellers and wanted to talk a little bit about the concept of the world island and how perhaps it really needs to be retired. And it's kind of actually like the basis of why there's been this long-standing Western paranoia of Central Asia and Russia. Now, for all of recorded history, like as far back as there's been writing and from other evidence even further back from that, there's been a phenomenon where civilizations arise, and they do well for, several centuries, and then some barbarians come tumbling out of Central Asia and fuck their shit up, and then that civilization falls, and then a few centuries later another civilization rises up on its bones, and, lather, rinse, repeat throughout history, so to say. And this all kind of developed into this concept of the world island as naval maps got better and we got a better idea of what the actual world's shape was in terms of its land masses and how everything related to each other. Now, the idea of the world island is that Eurasia is the world island. Africa, the Americas, Australia are kind of basically like, I can't remember if they were called the outer islands or the far islands, but we're kind of detached from the central core mass. And that the heartland of Eurasia is the Central Asian steppes and Siberia. And that whoever controls that area basically has the ability to ferry troops and supplies back and forth across the entire periphery. The periphery is basically the arc along the belly of the heartland that goes all the way from Scandinavia at one end, down through Europe, the Mediterranean, South Asia, the Indian subcontinent, Southeast Asia, China, and the Japans. And they're all vulnerable to things coming out of the heartland, and because of the topography of the region, it is in an age when horses, especially, were your primary mode of travel, that gave them a tactical advantage. Now, thankfully, for various other environmental reasons, up until fairly recently in history, this area wasn't terribly developed, and so it was always barbarian groups that kind of came through fairly temporarily. Only once in a blue moon did you have like a Genghis Khan Golden Horde kind of scenario where the people coming out of the heartland actually held on to the territories they had swept through in the periphery for a while afterwards. Even though eventually, as we can see, they withdrew and went back into their own home territories or were absorbed into the cultures they had conquered. If we had had cable television, and cable news especially, back at the time it was going on, I'm sure the pundits of that day would have been wringing their hands quite mightily back when the Trans-Siberian Railroad was first being put up, because that was, also Russia having the ability to ferry troops and supplies all across the Eurasian landmass with relative cheap ease, putting everyone around them theoretically in threat. And this whole world island concept has been kind of baked into, a lot of geopolitical military thinking for so long that it's kind of forgotten by the public. It's not kind of forgotten. It is very much forgotten by the public. And, I'm no expert in it. It's been a couple of years since I remember reading anything detailed about it. So, feel free to, do your own little rabbit hole dive on your own if you want to learn more about it. It's interesting, I think, to game masters, if you're interested in world building, understanding the geopolitics of how the world works and, how regions affect each other over large scales of time when you're developing your world's history and stuff is good, and you need real world examples. And so understanding this kind of basic idea of the heartland and the periphery and all that kind of stuff, makes sense. It's why it's kind of important that Russia is not permitted to have too many blue water seaports and all that kind of stuff, because that would make it even easier for them to break out of the periphery and actually threaten the far islands and all that kind of stuff. And, how much it's founded or not on rational paranoia of goals and objectives that the Russians might have, is, I guess, the real subject of debate here. But it certainly has, is a foundational basis for paranoia that has carried on throughout the last century plus. And that, it's seemingly regardless of who's in charge of Russia, it always ends up coming back to being this kind of fear of what are they up to, and this threat they pose to, pretty much anyone potentially surrounding them. Despite the fact that it almost always seems to be mainly a threat to Europe, and people don't seem to get quite upset about whatever threat they pose to South Asia or even East Asia. Obviously, they've allowed Mongolia to still exist, and they've maintained some sort of semblance of border peace with China for quite some time. So take that as you will, but the West has always been paranoid about them, and that's because of this historical precedent that, if you're looking back through recorded history, time and time and time again, people's shit has been fucked up by barbarians coming out of those lands. The problem is after that railway had been built and we entered into the industrial world and the Soviet Union modernized, Russia kind of against its will, and it's certainly at an extremely heavy cost in blood. We entered into a world that, the world island thinking doesn't really make sense anymore. Russia is no longer full of nomadic bands of horse-riding nomads. And, we have airplanes and rocket technology, and Russia's a space power and all that kind of stuff, the whole doctrine of high ground and all that kind of shit that now actually controls the world. The old world island model is pointless, and obviously no one's perfect, and the world's full of villains, and as some people have said recently, being a leader of any country involves making some harsh and bloody decisions. And so I'm not being an apologist by any stretch of the imagination.
We'll be right back after these messages from our sponsors.
While I still have you here, if you're looking for more of a tongue-in-cheek version of the Star Trek stereotype, might I suggest We Want Soviet Men, where you can play as comrades on your comrade starship exploring the stars. It's a sourcebook for Escape from Planet Matriarchy, the very first original Total Party System rulebook, where players take on the roles of 20th century astronauts who are shot 500 years into the future to crash land on the moon of Titan to discover the nightmare society that has evolved there, both of which can be found in the Vintage Future RPG, available now on Amazon.com in print or Drive-Thru RPG for a PDF.
We now return to our program in progress.
But there's a level of paranoia about Russia that seems to be more politically motivated. And I don't know, as long as we continue to cohabitate on the ISS with them and still have contact between our militaries and especially our space programs, then it's kind of hard really thinking that we're entirely as the enemies that we paint ourselves to be in our newspapers. It's convenient, for us to, beat ourselves up over, are we providing enough financial support to people? When all that financial support's actually going to line the pockets of investors in their stock portfolios because they have stock in weapon manufacturers and shit, So yeah. Anyway, I just thought it was something interesting to talk about and something that you could think about as a game master, and also since it spilled out of a conversation with other role-playing people, then I feel it's a valid thing to talk about. Leave your thoughts below in the comment section. Follow links in the description box to support the channel. Hit like and subscribe and the bell and do all the things. Be sure to tell everyone about how amazing Total Party Skills is. Shout out to Table Runner Crispy for having used the Total Party System Rules Handbook to run his little Fear City intro game, kind of some sort of mafia retro pulp kind of role-playing game he did a live stream of. I had recently left a link to that somewhere on the channel. You know how to find things. Stay waspinated.
Yeah.